They judged a simple man in first class and discovered too late who he really was. Patricia Worthington shifted uncomfortably in her first-class seat, casting disapproving glances at the young man who had just sat down beside her. With his stained t-shirt, worn-out jeans and an old backpack slung over his shoulder, he looked completely out of place among the suited executives and elegant ladies occupying the privileged section of the New York-Portland flight. "Excuse me, are you sure this is your seat?" Patricia asked, unable to hide the disdain in her voice as she adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. The young man, who couldn't have been more than 25, simply smiled politely and showed her his boarding pass. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 3A. His voice was calm, almost timid, but there was a quiet confidence in it that only irritated the 68-year-old woman further. Patricia exchanged meaningful looks with Margaret, her longtime friend seated across the aisle. Both women were part of New York's high society and were heading to Portland for an important charity event. The presence of this scruffy young man next to Patricia felt like an affront to the luxury and exclusivity that a first-class ticket was supposed to guarantee. The flight attendant came by offering champagne before takeoff. When he offered a glass to the young man, he politely declined, asking only for a glass of water. This only confirmed Patricia's suspicions. He clearly didn't belong there. "First time flying first class?" she asked, her tone falsely friendly, barely masking her condescension. "No, actually not," the young man replied simply, offering no further explanation. His short answer only fueled Patricia's irritation before she could make another. "Remark," the captain announced takeoff. As the plane ascended, she noticed the young man gripping the armrests tightly, his knuckles turning white from the pressure. "He's scared," she thought with a petty sense of satisfaction. Once they reached cruising altitude, the flight attendant returned, distributing comfort kits. When she handed the first-class kit to the young man, which included a sleep mask, socks, headphones, and high-end toiletries, he thanked her with a genuine smile that, for a brief moment, made Patricia question her assumptions. But she quickly dismissed the thought. "Are you traveling to Portland for leisure?" she asked, more out of boredom than genuine curiosity. "Not exactly," he replied after a brief hesitation. "I'm going for work." Patricia let out a quiet laugh. "Work? And what kind of work requires you to fly first class dressed like that?" The young man looked her directly in the eyes for the first time. "The kind of work that values substance over appearance, ma'am." His response, delivered without hostility but with firmness, left Patricia momentarily speechless. Annoyed at her own reaction, she turned to her fashion magazine, determined to ignore the intruder for the rest of the flight. As she flipped through the glossy pages, she couldn't help but notice the young man pulling out a surprisingly advanced laptop from his old backpack, working intently on what appeared to be complex lines of code and diagrams. Occasionally, he received messages on his phone that seemed to make him tense. About an hour after takeoff, the mood in the cabin shifted abruptly. A flight attendant approached the young man with a concerned expression. "Mr. Miller," the captain, "requests your presence in the cockpit, please." The use of his last name and the attendant's respectful tone made Patricia's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. The young man quickly stowed his laptop in his backpack, his expression now serious in a way she hadn't seen before. "Did something happen?" asked Margaret to the flight attendant, voicing the curiosity all the first-class passengers now felt. "We're experiencing some technical issues, but there's no cause for concern," she replied professionally, though her eyes betrayed a hint of apprehension. When the young man stood up to follow the flight attendant, Patricia noticed a badge falling from his jeans pocket. Instinctively, she picked it up from the floor. "Hey, you dropped this," she said, handing it to him. It was just a glimpse, but enough to see the National Aerospace Research Center logo and the name Ethan Miller, followed by Aerospace Navigation Systems Specialist. The young man quickly took the badge, thanked her with a nod, and headed to the cockpit. Patricia froze, trying to process what she'd just discovered. "What was that?" Margaret asked, leaning into the aisle. "I think I just made a terrible mistake," Patricia murmured, feeling her face burn with shame. 20 tense minutes passed in silence. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something wasn't right. Finally, the captain's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We had an issue with the aircraft's navigation system, but fortunately we've resolved it. I'd especially like to thank Dr. Ethan Miller for his vital assistance. We'll continue our flight to Portland as scheduled. Thank you for your patience." All eyes turned to the empty seat beside Patricia. A few minutes later, Ethan returned, looking exhausted but relieved. As he sat down, he was met with entirely different looks, now of curiosity and respect. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. "Dr. Miller," Patricia began quietly, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "I apologize for my earlier behavior. I didn't know—" "It's fine," he interrupted kindly. "Happens all the time. You saved the plane?" she asked, still processing the situation. Ethan gave a small smile. "Not exactly. I just helped with a navigation software issue. It's my specialty." "But you're so young to be an expert called in for emergencies," Margaret remarked, having moved closer to listen. "I'm 27, and I've worked with aerospace systems since I was 19, he explained without arrogance. "I developed a navigation algorithm used by several American airlines." Patricia felt the weight of her earlier arrogance crash down on her. She'd spent the whole time judging and dismissing a brilliant young man who just ensured everyone's safety. "Why didn't you say anything when I was so rude?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. Ethan shrugged. "I don't owe strangers explanations about who I am, and I learned long ago that people see what they want to see." The answer, though gentle, hit Patricia like a slap. She'd always prided herself on her discernment, her ability to read people. How could she have been so wrong? The flight attendant approached again, this time with a bottle of premium champagne. "Compliments of the captain, Dr. Miller," she said, pouring a glass. "And if you need anything else during the flight, just let us know." Ethan thanked her politely, but Patricia noticed he only took a small sip before setting the glass aside. "Don't you like champagne?" she asked, trying to restart the conversation on more respectful terms. "Not really. I prefer orange. Juice, actually," he replied with a shy smile. But I didn't want to refuse the captain's gesture. That small human detail somehow made the situation even more embarrassing for Patricia. Not only had she misjudged that young man's intellectual capabilities, but she had also assumed his tastes and preferences should align with what she considered refined. "You mentioned you're going to Portland for work. What exactly will you be doing there?" she asked, genuinely interested now. Ethan hesitated for a moment, seeming to weigh how much he should share. "I'll be overseeing the installation of a new monitoring system at the weather station in the Pacific Northwest forests. It's a project I've been developing for the last 3 years." "That sounds important," Margaret remarked, still standing in the aisle, completely absorbed in the conversation. "It is quite important, yes," Ethan confirmed. "The system can detect abnormal weather patterns and predict extreme events with far greater accuracy than current models." "And would that help prevent disasters?" Patricia asked, beginning to grasp the magnitude of the young man's work. "Exactly. Especially for riverside communities, which are the most vulnerable to changes in rainfall patterns and river levels." Patricia felt an even stronger wave of shame. While she and Margaret were heading to Portland for a charity event that, deep down, was little more than an opportunity to socialize and appear in society columns. This young man she had looked down on was literally going to save lives with his knowledge. "Why do you travel dressed like that?" Margaret asked bluntly, pointing at the stained t-shirt. "I mean, surely you could afford better clothes." Ethan looked at his t-shirt with an expression that mixed affection and sadness. "This shirt belonged to my father. He was a mechanic in New Orleans and dreamed of seeing me graduate. He worked 2 jobs to pay for my education. The stains are from grease at his shop. He passed away before seeing me enter university, but I always wear this shirt when I'm implementing a new project. It's my way of keeping him with me during important moments." The silence that followed his revelation was heavy. Patricia felt tears forming in her eyes. Her entire life, she had judged people by their appearances, their social status, their clothing brands and accessories. And in less than 2 hours, All her certainties had been shattered by this unassuming young man in a grease-stained t-shirt. As for first class, Ethan continued, breaking the uncomfortable silence, I don't spend my money on expensive clothes or cars, but I don't skimp on two things, books and comfort for long trips. I've had back problems since an accident in my teens, and economy seats are torture for me. Once again, Patricia felt diminished by her own prejudices. She had assumed so many things about this young man, all of them wrong. Dr. Miller, I truly apologize for my behavior, she said sincerely. It was unforgivably rude and prejudiced. Ethan looked at her kindly. Mrs. Worthington, Patricia Worthington. Mrs. Worthington, we all make misjudgments. What matters is recognizing them and learning from them. The maturity and generosity of his response made Patricia feel even worse. How could this young man be so emotionally evolved while she, with over 40 years more life experience, still behaved like an elitist teenager? The next few hours of the flight passed with surprisingly pleasant conversation. Ethan spoke about his work at NARC, his research and the challenges he faced. Patricia and Margaret shared details about their lives in New York and the charity event they were attending, a gala to raise funds for riverside schools in the Pacific Northwest forests. What an incredible coincidence, Ethan noted. The system I'm installing will also benefit those very same communities. Perhaps we can collaborate in some way, suggested Margaret, suddenly animated. Our group has connections with several business people who might be interested in your work. That would be wonderful, replied Ethan with genuine enthusiasm. Funding is always the biggest obstacle to implementing these projects on a large scale. As the plane approached Portland, Patricia realized how completely her perspective had changed in just a few hours. The scruffy intruder she had dismissed was now someone she deeply admired. Ethan, do you have any free time in Portland? She asked hesitantly. I'd like to invite you to our gala. I'm sure many people would be interested in learning about your work. The young man seemed genuinely surprised by the invitation. Yes, I think I can rearrange my schedule to attend. Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Worthington. Please, call me Patricia, she said with a sincere smile. When the plane landed at Portland International Airport, the first-class passengers watched curiously as the crew treated Ethan with the utmost respect. The captain himself came to thank him personally, explaining to the other passengers that, without Dr. Miller's expertise, they would have been forced to make an emergency landing in Chicago. Dr. Miller identified and remotely fixed a navigation system failure that our ground technicians couldn't resolve, the captain explained, his voice filled with gratitude. The same passengers who had looked disdainfully at the young man in his stained t-shirt now regarded him with admiration and respect. Some even tried to take photos with him, which he politely declined, visibly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Let's finalize the details for the gala, Patricia said as they disembarked. Do you have a business card? Actually, I don't use them, Ethan replied with a shy smile, typing his number into her phone. Less paper to throw away. Patricia smiled, recognizing yet another small lesson in that simple gesture. Thank you, Ethan, not just for the number, but for teaching me a valuable lesson today. What lesson? He asked, genuinely curious. That we're never too old to recognize our mistakes and prejudices, and that the most extraordinary people are rarely the ones who try to appear extraordinary. Ethan smiled, a real smile that lit up his youthful face. That's a great lesson for all of us, Patricia. As they said goodbye in the airport lobby, Patricia watched the young scientist walk toward the exit, his worn backpack carrying technology that could save countless lives, his stained t-shirt bearing the memory of a hard-working father. And for the first time in many years, she felt ashamed of her Bloomingdale's purse and Jimmy Choo shoes. Who am I really? She wondered, as she stepped into the luxury taxi waiting for her. And what have I truly done that's meaningful with my privileges? What Patricia didn't know was that this chance encounter would completely change the course of her life, and that the young man she had judged so harshly would be responsible for the greatest transformation she would ever experience. 3 days later, the charity gala for Riverside Schools was in full swing at the luxurious Cascade Mountain Lodge in Portland. The main hall was decorated with northwest orchids and lighting that mimicked the sunset over the Columbia River. The cream of Portland and New York society mingled over glasses of champagne and gourmet canapes, all dressed in formal attire that likely cost more than the annual income of the families they intended to help. Patricia was restless, constantly checking the entrance to the hall. Ethan had confirmed his attendance, but it was already past 9 in the evening, and he still hadn't arrived. Had he changed his mind? Or perhaps he felt intimidated by the setting. "He's not coming," Margaret remarked, adjusting her emerald necklace, probably felt out of place. "No, he'll come," Patricia insisted, though doubt began to gnaw at her certainty. He gave his word. At 9:30, just as the charity auction was about to begin, Ethan finally appeared. He wore a simple yet well-tailored suit that accentuated his youth and good looks. Despite the change in appearance, Patricia noticed he still had on his worn-out sneakers, a small detail that strangely made her smile. "Sorry I'm late," he said, approaching. "We had a last-minute issue with the equipment setup." "What matters is that you're here," she replied, genuinely happy to see him. "Come on, I want to introduce you to some people." For the next hour, Patricia guided Ethan through the hall, introducing him to business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists. To her surprise, the young scientist proved articulate and confident, explaining his project with a clarity that captured even the most disinterested listeners. When he spoke about the climate monitoring system and its potential impact, his eyes shone with contagious passion. "You understand we could reduce response time to natural disasters by up to 70%, he explained to a group of executives. "That means saving not just lives, but livelihoods. Entire communities that now lose. Everything in floods would have time to protect their belongings, their livestock, their crops." Patricia watched from a distance, impressed by the transformation. The shy young man from the plane now commanded the attention of some of the most powerful people in the United States. And the most surprising part, he didn't seem to be trying to impress anyone. He spoke with the same sincerity and passion he'd shown during the flight. When the auctioneer took the stage to begin the charity auction, Ethan approached Patricia again. "Your gala is incredible," he remarked. "I hope you raise a lot for the schools." "Thank you," she replied, though she felt an odd discomfort. After meeting Ethan and understanding his work, the whole event suddenly seemed superficial. Yes, they'd raise money for a good cause, but how much of it would actually reach the communities? And more importantly, how many of these people truly cared about the fate of the Riverside residents beyond the chance to flaunt their generosity? The auction continued with impressive bids for luxury items, art, and exclusive experiences. When they reached the final item, a crystal statue representing the wildlife of the Northwest, the bids had already surpassed $500,000. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, our special final item," announced the auctioneer. "A one-of-a-kind piece by renowned Italian artist Dale Chihuly. We'll start the bidding at—" "Excuse me," a voice interrupted. It was Ethan, who had stepped onto the stage. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. "I apologize for the interruption," he continued, addressing the crowd, "but I'd like to offer an additional item for this auction, if the organizers allow it." Patricia's eyes widened, completely caught off guard. What was Ethan doing? "I'm offering the full installation of an advanced climate monitoring system in 3 Riverside schools, which will serve as early warning centers for their communities. This includes the equipment, installation, and training for local staff." A stunned silence filled the room. The value of such a system was immeasurable, not just in monetary terms, but for the real impact it would have on those communities' lives. "The starting bid would be—" the auctioneer began, clearly unsure how to proceed. "There is no bid," Ethan interrupted with a smile. "I'm donating the system. I only ask that the funds raised tonight be directed not just to school infrastructure, but also to science and technology scholarships for the most promising young people in these communities. Because education, more than anything else, is what can truly transform their lives." The room erupted in applause. People who had barely noticed Ethan's presence minutes earlier now approached to congratulate him, take photos, and exchange business cards. Patricia remained where she was, watching the scene with a mix of admiration and shame. In just a few minutes, Ethan had turned a social event, masquerading as charity, into something with real, lasting impact. And he'd done it without fanfare, without seeking recognition or status, simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. When he finally managed to break free from his admirers and approach Patricia, Ethan looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope I didn't disrupt your event," he said. "It was a spur-of-the-moment thing." "You didn't disrupt anything," she replied, tears in her eyes. "You gave it meaning." The next day, Patricia surprised herself and Margaret by announcing she would stay in Portland for a few more weeks. She wanted to oversee the system's installation in the Riverside schools and better understand Ethan's work. "You're completely taken with that young man," Margaret teased as she packed her bags to return to New York. "Don't be ridiculous," Patricia replied, though she felt her cheeks warm. "I'm taken with his project, with the impact it can have. And yes, I'm impressed by someone who dedicates his brilliant mind to helping others instead of just chasing wealth." In the weeks that followed, Patricia accompanied Ethan on his visits to the Riverside communities. For the first time in her 68 years, she experienced the real Pacific Northwest, not the tourist version from brochures, but the daily reality of people living in deep connection with the river and the forest. She saw children who rode for hours to get to school. She met teachers who, with minimal resources, worked miracles to provide quality education. She heard stories of families who had lost everything in sudden floods and entire communities forced to relocate due to shifting river paths. Most striking of all, she witnessed people's reactions when Ethan explained how the monitoring system would work and how it could save lives. The genuine gratitude in their eyes, the renewed hope, the curious children crowding around the city doctor with endless questions. "Why do you do this?" Patricia asked Ethan one afternoon as they returned by boat from a particularly remote community. "You could be making millions at any tech company in the world." Ethan gazed at the river for a moment before answering. "My grandmother was Riverside," he said finally. "She lived in a community not so different from the ones we've visited. When I was 8, there was a catastrophic flood. My father got us out in time, but my grandmother refused to leave the home she'd built with my grandfather." He paused, his eyes fixed on the water. "She survived, but lost everything. She was never the same after that. The loss destroyed her. Inside." Patricia felt a lump in her throat. "So that's why—" "Yes," he confirmed. "When I started university, I promised myself I'd find a way to spare other families from going through the same. Money was never my motivation." At that moment, looking at the young scientist framed by the sunset over the northwest forests, Patricia felt something stir within her. It wasn't just admiration or respect. It was a deep desire to be part of that mission, to give new meaning to her own life. Back in Portland at the hotel, she couldn't stop thinking about everything she had witnessed. Her luxury suite, which once felt like the height of comfort, now made her feel disconnected and frivolous. How could there be such contrast in the same world? How could she have lived so long in a bubble of privilege without truly seeing? The next morning, she made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew her. She invited Ethan for coffee and got straight to the point. "I want to support your project, not just with money, but with my time and my connections. I want to be part of this." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "Patricia, I don't understand." "Why?" "Because for the first time in my life, I saw something that truly matters," she replied simply. "I spent decades judging people by their clothes, their cars, their homes. I wasted so much time on things with no real value. I want the time I have left to mean something." "Are you sure?" he asked, still cautious. "It's not glamorous work. It means rickety boats, communities without reliable electricity, bugs everywhere." Patricia laughed. "I think I'll survive." After all, if a snobby New York socialite can learn not to judge a book by its cover, she can certainly learn to handle a few mosquitoes. Ethan smiled, extending his hand. "In that case, welcome to the team, Mrs. Worthington." "Patricia," She corrected, shaking his hand. Just Patricia. 6 months later, the project had expanded to 12 communities, thanks largely to Patricia's connections and her incredible fundraising skills. Her transformation had become so remarkable that it made headlines in magazines and newspapers. Socialite abandons luxury to save Northwest communities. Margaret and her old friends thought she was going through some kind of late-life crisis, but Patricia had never felt more clear-headed and fulfilled. She had rented a modest apartment in Portland and split her time between the city and the riverside communities, where she helped implement educational programs to complement the climate monitoring system. One particularly hot afternoon, while overseeing the installation of computers in a newly renovated school, she got a call from Ethan. His voice sounded more excited than ever. "We did it, Patricia. The State University approved the scholarship program. 20 students from riverside communities will be able to study environmental science and technology with all expenses paid." The news was the result of months of hard work, endless meetings, and relentless persistence. Patricia felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "That's wonderful, Ethan. When can we announce it to the communities? I'm organizing a ceremony for next week, and there's one more thing." She noticed hesitation in his voice. "What?" "The university wants to name the program after you, the Patricia Worthington Scholarship Program for Young Americans." Patricia nearly dropped the phone. No, that's not right," she protested immediately. "You're the visionary here, Ethan. If it should be named after anyone, it should be you." "I disagree," he replied firmly. "Without you, this would still just be a dream on paper. You transformed the project, Patricia. You brought resources, visibility, expanded our reach, and more importantly, you inspired so many people from your social circle to look beyond their eye. Privilege. Your example is changing minds." Patricia fell silent, processing his words. It was true that many of her old contacts, initially skeptical, had begun engaging in genuine social projects after seeing her transformation. Some had even visited the riverside communities and started their own initiatives. "Okay," she finally agreed. "But on one condition: it has to be called the Worthington Miller Program. After all, we're a team." Ethan laughed on the other end of the line. "Fair enough. We are a team." That night, alone in her apartment, Patricia reflected on the incredible journey of the past few months. It had all started with a prejudiced judgment on an airplane. If someone had told her that day that the young man in the stained t-shirt would completely change her life, she would have laughed dismissively. Now at 68 years old, when many of her peers were settling into comfortable retirement, she felt as if she was just beginning to truly live. She had a purpose, real impact, and genuine relationships with people who would never have entered her previous social circle. And there was Ethan, the brilliant young man who unintentionally had become her mentor, partner, and above all, friend. The 4-decade age gap didn't matter. They shared values, vision, and a common commitment that transcended any barrier. The following week, the scholarship program launch ceremony was held in the community of Riverdale Springs, one of the first to receive the monitoring system. The local school, now equipped with solar panels, computers, and satellite internet, all funded by Patricia's connections, was decorated with flowers and colorful banners. Families from nearby riverside communities had arrived by boat for the event. Excited children ran around. Young people chatted in small groups, eager to find out who would be the first recipients of the scholarships. When Patricia stepped onto the small makeshift stage alongside Ethan and the university representatives, she felt a lump in her throat. She looked at the hopeful faces in the crowd, at the children waving enthusiastically, and thought about how much she had changed. "About 8 months ago," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "I was on an airplane judging a young man by his appearance. I thought I knew everything about people just by looking at their clothes, their accessories, their social status." She paused, glancing at Ethan, who smiled encouragingly. "That young man I judged was Dr. Ethan Miller, whom you all know well today. And thanks to my terrible mistake in judgment, my life changed completely." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Many there knew Patricia only as the kind woman who helped schools and brought resources to their communities. I learned that we are never too old to change. It's never too late to open our eyes and hearts to realities different from our own. And above all, I learned that we must always look beyond appearances, because the most extraordinary people are rarely the ones who try to seem extraordinary. As she finished her speech and officially introduced the Worthington Miller program, Patricia felt a peace she had never known before. She looked at the Pacific Northwest sky, at the river that flowed endlessly, at the children whose futures would be different because of a chance encounter on an airplane, and suddenly, she remembered that first conversation with Ethan, when she had asked why he traveled first class wearing a stained t-shirt. Now the answer made perfect sense. The kind of work that values substance over appearance. That was the most valuable lesson she had ever learned. And at 68, Patricia Worthington finally understood the true meaning of wealth. A year had passed since the scholarship program's launch. The climate monitoring system had proven its worth during the rainy season, when early warnings allowed several communities to protect their belongings and livestock before the floods. No lives were lost, and material damage was significantly reduced compared to previous years. The project's success drew national and international attention. Universities and environmental organizations from various countries sent representatives to learn about the system developed by Ethan and implemented with Patricia's help. What had started as a local initiative had become a model to be replicated in other vulnerable regions around the world. For Patricia, each day brought new challenges and lessons. She had rented a simple but comfortable house in Riverdale Springs, where she spent most of her time coordinating educational projects and monitoring the progress of the scholarship recipients. Her apartment in New York City remained closed for most of the year, visited only when she needed to handle financial matters or meet with old contacts who could benefit the project. On a particularly hot December afternoon, Patricia was sitting on the porch of her house in Riverdale Springs, reviewing student progress reports, when she saw Ethan's boat approaching the small community pier. He had gone to Portland for a series of meetings with federal government representatives and was returning a week earlier than planned. "Did something happen?" she asked, concerned, as he walked up the path to her house. Ethan was smiling in a way she hadn't seen in a long time, a mix of excitement, pride, and nervousness. "Get ready for some amazing news," he said, sitting in the wicker chair beside her. "We've been selected to present our project at the World Conference on Climate Change in Geneva." Patricia let out a surprised gasp. "Ethan, that's wonderful. When is it?" "Next March, we'll have an entire panel dedicated to our system and the educational program. And the best part? They want us to present together, you and me." "Me?" Patricia felt a flutter in her stomach. "But you're the scientist, the expert. And you're the soul of this project," he said firmly. "Without you, we'd still be in the experimental phase, reaching just 2 or 3 communities. You turned a pilot project into a comprehensive program that's changing lives. Your story needs to be told too, Patricia." She shook her head, still processing the news. "Geneva, I never imagined." "There's one more thing," Ethan continued, now visibly nervous. "The conference coincides with the 1-year anniversary of the scholarship program. I was thinking, what if we organized a community wedding during the event, to celebrate all the transformations that have happened this year?" Patricia smiled, confused. "A community wedding? That sounds lovely, but I don't understand why you're so nervous suggesting it." Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes locked on hers. "Because I was thinking we could be one of the couples." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Patricia went completely still, certain she had misunderstood. "Ethan, what are you saying?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Patricia," he said simply. "I know it sounds crazy. I know there's a significant age difference. I know many people won't understand. But this past year, working side by side with you, sharing dreams, challenges, victories, and defeats, I fell in love. Not with the socialite I met on the plane, but with the incredible woman who had the courage to completely reinvent her life at 68. Tears streamed freely down Patricia's face. In all her past relationships, including 2 failed marriages to wealthy, powerful men, she had never felt the deep connection she had developed with Ethan. But she had never imagined he could see her as anything more than a work partner and friend. Ethan, I don't know what to say. You're only 28. I'm more than twice your age. What future could we possibly have together? The future we're building every day, he replied simply. Patricia, age is just a number. What we have is rare. We share values, vision, purpose. We laugh at the same things. We're moved by the same stories. We make the perfect team. And yes, I love her, not like a mother or a mentor, but like a life partner. Under the intensity of that gaze, Patricia felt simultaneously the oldest and youngest she had ever been. Part of her wanted to protect him from a decision he might regret, wanted to remind him that she would keep aging while he was still in the prime of his youth. But another part, the part that had learned to live authentically this past year, recognized the truth in his words. Are you sure about this? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Absolutely sure. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he replied, taking her hands in his. So what's your answer? Patricia looked at their intertwined hands, Ethan's young, strong hands, which created technology to save lives, and her own aged hands, which had finally learned to build something meaningful. Yes, she answered, feeling as if a final weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Yes, I will marry you. Ethan held her tightly, and in that moment, all the differences between them, age, background, upbringing, seemed completely irrelevant. What mattered was the future they would build together, the lives they would continue to impact, the legacy they would leave. The next morning, when they announced their engagement to the community, they were met with genuine joy. To the simple people who knew them through their daily work and commitment to their well-being, the age difference was just an unimportant detail. What they saw was the glow in their eyes when they were together, the way they perfectly complemented each other. Margaret, when she heard the news over the phone, was initially shocked. Patricia, have you completely lost your mind? What will people say? Her friend asked, genuinely concerned. Probably the same things they said when I left. New York to live in the Pacific Northwest, Patricia replied calmly. But you know what, Margaret? For the first time in my life, I don't care what they say. I'm happy, truly happy. The community wedding ceremony took place the following March, exactly as Ethan had suggested. 15 couples from various Riverside communities were united that day in a vibrant celebration, blending local traditions with modern elements. To Patricia's surprise, many of her old friends traveled to Riverdale Springs for the ceremony. Even those who had initially criticized her Northwest phase now showed genuine interest in the work she and Ethan were doing. Some had even begun financially supporting the project, impressed by the tangible results. Margaret, who had resisted the idea of the marriage at first, ended up being her matron of honor. After spending 2 weeks in the community, observing firsthand the dynamic between Patricia and Ethan, the genuine bond they shared, and the impact their work had on local lives, she finally understood. I've never seen you so radiant, she confessed on the morning of the wedding as she helped Patricia get ready. He really loves you, doesn't he? Yes, he does, Patricia confirmed, looking at herself in the simple mirror of her room. She had chosen a light white cotton dress adorned with traditional Northwest embroidery instead of the high-fashion gown she would have picked in her previous life. And I love him too, Margaret, in a way I never thought possible at this stage of life. The Riverside ceremony was broadcast via satellite to the conference in Geneva, where the pair would present their work the following week. Representatives from international organizations, universities, and governments watched with emotion as the young scientist and the former socialite exchanged vows that sealed not just a marriage, but a commitment to a better future for the Pacific Northwest forests and its communities. When I boarded that plane with my stained t-shirt, Ethan said in his vows, I never imagined I'd be judged so harshly by someone, and I certainly never dreamed that same person would become the love of my life, my partner in every way. Patricia, you taught me it's never too late to start over, to reinvent yourself, to open your heart. I promise to spend the rest of my life repaying that lesson. Patricia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears when it was her turn. Ethan, I judged you by your appearance on that plane. It was the biggest mistake and the greatest luck of my life. Her voice, clear and steady, carried the wisdom of her years. You showed me a world beyond the shallowness I lived in. You gave me purpose, meaning, and above all, real love. I promise never to judge a book by its cover again, to always value substance over appearance, in life and in love." When the officiant declared them married, and Ethan kissed her gently, Patricia felt a perfect circle had closed, from arrogance to humility, from prejudice to acceptance, from superficiality to purpose, and above all, from loneliness to true love. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, filled with music, dancing, and regional dishes. Representatives from every community touched by their project came to honor the couple who had changed their lives. The following week, in E2, Geneva, Patricia and Ethan presented their project's results to an international audience. Dressed formally yet maintaining the simplicity that had become their trademark, they explained how cutting-edge technology and community education were transforming the reality of the Pacific Northwest forests. The success of this project, Patricia concluded in her final speech, lies in its integrated approach. Installing technology isn't enough without educating people. Education isn't enough without offering opportunities. And above all, we can't impose solutions from the top down. We must work side by side with communities, respecting their traditional knowledge and integrating it with scientific understanding. The presentation received a standing ovation. Representatives from Africa, Asia, and Latin America immediately approached, eager to replicate the model in their own vulnerable regions. Within days, the Worthington Miller program had become a global phenomenon. Dear listener, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. Upon returning to the United States after the conference, Patricia and Ethan were welcomed as heroes. Newspapers and magazines that had once mocked Patricia's madness now ran glowing features about the couple, changing the face of climate adaptation in the U.S. Invitations for talks, interviews, and consultations poured in daily. "What do you think of all this?" Ethan asked Patricia as they watched the sunset from their porch in Riverdale Springs a week after their return. "I think it's good. For spreading awareness," she mused. "But we can't lose sight of what really matters, the people here." He smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Always keeping your feet on the ground, that's why I love you." In the years that followed, the program continued to grow. The first scholarship recipients graduated and returned to their communities, bringing new knowledge and perspectives. The monitoring system was refined and expanded. New partnerships were forged with universities and international organizations. Patricia, even as she entered her 7th decade of life, remained active and engaged. If advanced age had once seemed like a burden to her, it was now a wellspring of wisdom that perfectly complemented Ethan's technical brilliance and youthful energy. Together they proved daily that appearances deceive, whether in the snap judgment of a poorly dressed young man in first class on an airplane, or in the assumption that a couple with a significant age gap couldn't share true love and a common purpose. In an interview for a prominent magazine, when asked about the secret to her success in reinventing herself so completely at 70, Patricia answered with the simplicity that had become her trademark. "The secret is opening your heart to being wrong." When I realized how mistaken I'd been about Ethan on that plane, I opened myself to the possibility of being wrong about so many other things, about what brings happiness, about what gives life meaning, about my own potential. Judgment keeps us trapped. Humility frees us to grow, no matter our age. And when asked what she'd say to those who judged her relationship with a much younger man, she smiled serenely. "I'd simply say, it's never too late to discover we were wrong, and to be grateful for being wrong sometimes, because it's in our biggest mistakes that we often find the paths to our greatest joys." On a clear morning, 5 years after their marriage, Patricia woke before dawn and walked to the pier in Riverdale Springs. Sitting there, watching the river awaken as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the arrogant, prejudiced woman she'd once been, judging a young man by his outward appearance, unable to see beyond the surface. She thought of how that mistaken judgment had transformed into the greatest blessing of her life, bringing her purpose, meaning, and a love she'd never imagined possible. How unpredictable life's paths could be. The woman who'd spent decades valuing status, appearances, and material possessions now found deep happiness in a simple house by the river, working tirelessly to improve the lives of communities she hadn't even known existed. "I thought I'd find you here," said a familiar voice behind her. Ethan sat beside her on the pier, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Good morning, my love," she replied, leaning into him. "I was just reflecting on how surprising life can be." "And what did you conclude?" he asked with a smile. Patricia gazed at the horizon, where the sun now rose majestically over the forest. "That sometimes we need to be completely wrong to find what's truly right." And in that perfect moment, with the river flowing endlessly before her and the man she loved by her side, Patricia Worthington Miller knew with absolute certainty that she was at last exactly where she belonged. The end. Dear listener, have you ever judged someone by their appearance and later been surprised? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that transform how we see the world.